Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Test, Learn, Grow podcast, where we're focused at the moment on leadership in higher education. This is a series that is sponsored by our friends at Complete U, and I'm really excited to welcome to the podcast Dr. Steve McKellips, who is the Vice Provost of Enrollment Management at the University of Akron. Steve, welcome to the program.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. Well, one of the things that I love to do with leaders like yourself is to really just start with you. Like, I love to hear the stories around what brought you into higher education, because I think they're so profound. The leaders that we've talked to, I think, bring such a fantastic kind of blend of personal experience, heart, and smarts into what they're doing. So, talk to us a little bit about yourself, Steve. Where did your roots start, and how did they lead you to higher education?
Well, my roots started just outside of Green Bay, Wisconsin, from a small town called Kaukauna. I'm that population who ends up in higher ed but didn't know you could actually be in higher ed when you went to college. I was a broadcast major. I wanted to do local sports. I like to crack jokes, and every time I watched the television, the sports guy was making fun of the weather guy, and it seemed like a place you could go and have fun. So that's what I wanted to do. And then I interned at CNN Sports in Atlanta during college and learned I have no interest in that space. It's a lot more cutthroat behind the scenes. And I just didn't want to, essentially fight for my paycheck, if you will. So I had to go do something else. So I took a job as a recruiter at my alma mater. I went to Marquette University in Milwaukee and became a recruiter there. I had been an RA for the last 2 years, and also a cheerleader there for several years. And so I thought the one thing I had naturally going for me was this background knowledge and enthusiasm for the place. Left a little bit to pursue something in my major just to see if it would take, and it didn't. And so I came back in 1996, and I've been doing the higher ed game ever since 96.
That's awesome. I love hearing those stories. And one of the things that's always interesting to me in talking to leaders like yourself is to ask you a little bit about some of the influences and maybe mentors that you've had along the way. Who were some of those early influencers for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. You spend some time thinking about it later in your career. You kind of forget to think about it early in your career. But I've been asked that question a couple times, and there's really two people. There's the first person that I would point to would be the gentleman who lived across the hall from me at the time. I was in RA. He was a hall chaplain. But he, in the second year, got promoted to the executive vice president and provost. But he still wanted to live in the residence hall, so he was across the hall. The provost lived across the hall from me. It was kind of fun. And what was neat about that experience was that was a year where I had some real trauma. My stepfather lost his job. His factory closed down. And essentially phased out at the end of the calendar year. So I had no resource to come back and pay for my senior year, second semester. Went in and talked to Father Leahy about it. Father Leahy's now the president of Boston College.
I'm very familiar with that name. My brother's an alum of that school. Wow, that's incredible.
Right. Yeah, and he said to me, I told him that, I couldn't believe it. I had to go home. I got this close and I couldn't finish. And he said to me, we don't send seniors home, so let me make a call. And they fixed it, and I was able to finish. It was that simple, that we don't send seniors home. So it left this big mark on me that, everybody goes through college. They go to college as an individual, but they graduate as part of a collective. And I just never realized that people would be there to help me. The second person was a faculty member. His name is Dr. Marvin Berkowitz. He's in psychology, not at Marquette anymore. I think he's at SLU. But he had started a comedy improv group, and like I said, I wanted to do comedy. So that's why I was looking into being a sports guy. So I saw this improv comedy troupe, and I thought, I got to be a part of that. And it was an elective, and so I took the class, and it turned out it was the hardest class I've ever taken in my entire college career, all the way through the PhD. There were 2 tests, a midterm and a final, and they were multiple choice. But they were this kind of multiple choice. Is A right? Is B right? Is C right? Is A and B right, but only if C is not right? Is A right, but D is always false? All these. So the options would go to like letter J, and you had to get
almost like Choose Your Own Adventure back in the day of
there was no.
You and I were reading books, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I got a 20 on my first test, and it was a problem because I took it as a senior and I took it as an elective, but I was a little slow through the uptick on my number of credits, and so I had to take 18 credits to graduate each of my last 3 semesters. And that individual, I had a 20, but I had to pass or I couldn't graduate. So I went in and talked to him about it, and we agreed that I would come in once a week, and we would go through the lectures again, and he'll help me on how to study. And I ended up getting an A in the class. And so I approached him afterwards and I said, "Hey, I just want to thank you for giving me an A. You must have realized how hard I worked. I certainly didn't deserve it." And he laughed. And I thought, well, that's not the expression I was expecting. And I said, "What's so funny?" And he said, "I didn't give you an A." And I said, no, you did. And he's like, no, I didn't. So he said, "I gave you a C." And so he had to go back in and change my grade. And that dropped me below a 3.0 on my cumulative GPA. And he felt so bad doing it that he wrote me a letter commenting on my honesty. To even bring it up, he said, most people would just walk away and not address it. But I didn't do that. And he wished there was a reward better than changing my grade down. So he wrote that complimentary letter and sent it to absolutely everybody who supervised me in any capacity. So he sent it to my hall director, to the person in charge of residence life. He sent it to the dean of student affairs. He sent it to my cheerleading coach. He sent it to the athletics director. He sent it to my advisor and to the person who's chair of my department. And then he sent copies to my parents. And so in total, there were 18 copies of this letter that he sent out. This is back in the day when you had to address everything yourself and stamps and everything. And it really taught me that there are so many ways to be successful. And it isn't always just the number on the grade. It's what you do with the people that you come into contact with. And so those 2 things, we don't send seniors home and be significant and make the most out of the moment when you're with somebody. Those 2 things, I think, really is what kept me in higher ed all these years. Sorry for the long story, but it's been fun to reminisce about those 2 individuals all these years later.
Incredible stories. And what I'm taking from what you've been so gracious in sharing is the profound impact that your college experience had in shaping the man that you were going to be. And I think that, at least from experiences that I've had personally and with leaders that I talk to, it seems that those are the people that tend to get involved more deeply from a career perspective, and to do it in a way that's really coming from the heart.
It's interesting you say. Thank you for saying that. I couldn't agree more. And there's at a Jesuit school like Marquette, the context of cura personalis kind of resonates as a mantra there, and that care for the whole person. I never knew what that meant when I was there. And then as I got older and I started to see these stories and their impact they had, I started to realize, oh, that's what that was. That was the care for the person. Oh, okay, I get it. And so what's challenging for me now in the modern era is when you hear people say things like college doesn't matter anymore, or I have to get an A, I only get A's, or whatever the case may be. And you kind of have that, you're missing the boat of what's supposed to be going on at this time in your life. This is cultivating of an opportunity to thrust you forward. This isn't just transaction on a ledger. This is that moment that starts to define the you that you will be the rest of your life. And it's a really essential part of one's development. And it's got nothing to do with the GPA. It's got nothing to do with exactly which major it is and exactly which class you got a B or a C in. I I haven't talked about lifespan developmental psychology and Dr. Berkowitz in 30 years, but somebody asked me about it a week ago, and I can't stop thinking about the impact that silly little thing, that moment had. And here I sit 30 years into this business, and I'm doing the same thing for other people. And now I finally put together why. It's been kind of an interesting couple of days walking myself back through that headspace.
I'm sure it has, but I would imagine that it's also been one that is validating and in some ways fulfilling, in the sense that you kind of kept true to some of the things that you learned at a very critical part or moment in your life, right?
Yeah, and it's funny you say that. So not that you wanted this to be about story time, but you're going to get another one now. 2 weeks ago, there was a team from Complete College America on campus presenting to us, and this is how I got reconnected with this Berkowitz story. The icebreaker was, tell me something about somebody who impacted your life when you were in college. And the presenter was telling a story that suddenly became very familiar. She identified a person of influence who was somebody I used to work with. And for those who are interested, they could go see it on my LinkedIn page. But she started to tell the story about having been at one institution and then transferred to a place in Wisconsin called the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. And she named the faculty member who was so influential to her. And I thought, I was at Whitewater. I know that person. So I LinkedIn stalked her to find out when she was there. And sure enough, I was there when she was there. And I realized that I, at the time, hand-signed all my admission letters. And so I walked up to her and said, hey, I signed your admission letter. And she said, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I just found my admission letter about 2 weeks ago. She was going through some old books or something and found a copy of her old admit letter and remembered noticing that this is back when they hand-signed admission letters. And so it's just funny because I approached her and said, I learned a long time ago that people needed to know that I was taking the time to make the decision, not just making a decision. And now there's just too many and we don't do it anymore. But at that time, it was my first director's job, and it was what my director did at Marquette. And so that's what I was doing too, because this is how you show people that it matters. And here it is, 2023, and I was her admissions director in 2006, and we bump into each other having just talked about the admission letter individually. So she posted it to LinkedIn and said, it's amazing how full circle you come. Here's the guy who signed my admit letter all these years ago. So it was a fun way to reconnect, and it just gives you that pay it forward cycle of what we do for each other. We never really get to see the future we pay forward, but when it comes back in some way, it's a pretty powerful opportunity.
Oh, for sure. And one that probably keeps you going, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes all the bad days better, for sure.
Well, so I can envision, as I'm talking to you and just hearing your personal story, why getting involved in admissions and enrollment would be a natural fit. Somebody who's got a real personal connection to the school, can speak about it authentically, is a cheerleader literally at the school, and can in some ways inspire people through combination of advocating for the school and the experience that it gave you. I would imagine in the early days there was just by nature of the times that we lived in, it was a little easier to have that more personal connection, much like what you described with the handwritten note. How have things changed for you as you've moved into the technology age? And clearly today you're working and you're leading enrollment for some sizable institution today. It's tough to maintain that type of personal connection.
Yeah, thanks for the observation. People are often surprised when you tell them that you've done anything for 30 years. And I keep pinching myself thinking, how has it really been that long? But what's interesting to me is remembering exactly the thing you're talking about. I started before the internet. And that sounds embarrassing out loud. I graduated in 92 and I started working in admissions in 93. And I remember getting the first Macintosh computers on my desk at Marquette in 93. And there was no network. It was just a Macintosh computer by itself. And there was no word processing software on it. So all I could do is use sticky notes on the old Mac. So I actually brought my own computer from home because it had WordPerfect on it, and I could write letters to people. So it's funny to go from that type of environment where you would get an old map and you would circle all your high schools and drive to the high schools and look for the lights on the football field to know if you're close. And nowadays, you could just hit a button and it'll just guide you right to the parking lot. So there's a little bit of the work is in a lot of ways a lot easier now than it used to be. But what I would say the biggest difference is I haven't had a handshake, an introduction, if you will, to a student about a college in 20 some years. It used to be that they would leave their classes, come see me in a room. I'd introduce myself, give them a card, walk them through a brochure, explain to them what the experience was going to be like. And today they go on the website whenever they want to be on the website. They could be 8 years old, but I've never been able to introduce the university to anybody since the internet's come out. I can no longer, I say control, although it sounds a little bit too much power for what I mean, but I can't control how the person consumes my information. So I spend time trying to figure out where they are first before I know what to contribute, because in the past I had a flow that we would ultimately deliver, and that's just gone right out the window. And so there's, you've heard the expression, somebody's never met a stranger. In this case, you'd never met somebody who didn't know anymore that college was an option. And, back then people still had the, I never really thought about going to college context. And now everybody's been thinking about it since they were, 3 and 5 years old. And that doesn't mean they're all going to go. It just means they've all known it's there. So yeah, it's been a completely different transition in this particular discipline after these years. Probably the fastest transition higher ed's ever seen.
Yeah, and my observation, Steve, and I love your perspective on this, is that, while it has changed dramatically, and I think you kind of articulated it really well, I still think that kids, and they are kids, right, are looking for that feeling of this is my place, right? And
Yeah,
that's
for sure.
of I'm at, and a real experience when they are evaluating their options that they fit somewhere, right? And it's like, how do you create that in a world that's entirely different than what you and I grew up in?
Yeah, I would say that the way you're describing it is quite real and quite consistent, and maybe even the same as it was. What's different is they don't know they're looking for it now. The way that I would maybe describe it is, coming back to like 93, families and they would make a list, a pros and cons list of all the good things and the bad list, if you will. And then you went to the one with the longer list is what it would boil down to. But since then, we went through an epic rise in tuition prices. Tuition doubled every 8 years for 25. And as a result, where we sit now is a different financial place for that to be the simple metric. And so we've gotten into a lot more precision on the search. And so we think we're being super precise. And the truth is we don't know what to put on our list. So for example, I'm going to pretend that that I had a major in, say, engineering. Well, I only put engineering schools on my list. So by definition, every place I apply to they're going to all have engineering. And what's more, I'm going to say that I'm interested in mechanical, So all my schools are going to have mechanical engineering. And if you ask them all, they'll say, we have co-ops and we have co-ops. So now they all have co-ops. They all have these relationships with these big companies. So I'll be able to get a job no matter which one I go to. And I want to live on campus, so they all have to have residence. So what you found is you've applied to 3, 5, 7, 20 schools that are exactly the same. Oh, I want to be at a big city. They're all in big cities. I want to be in a small city. They're all in small cities. So you've created a complete flat-footed tie on all the candidates. And so now how are you going to pick? It used to be, well, I'm going to go to the one with the co-op. Well, they all have co-ops. So ultimately what makes students' decisions when they choose to go off to college is exactly what you just described. All the tactical things I would be happy with everything. So all of a sudden we're going to the things that are making decisions are like, well, that one has a lazy river in the rec center. This one has going back a few years, but this one has a climbing wall. This one is all indoors. This one's in a tropical climate. Well, you should have never gone to the college with the lazy river. You're an engineering student, you should know better, but all of the things that were important are at every place. You're going down to like 7th, 8th, 9th, 15th most important variable to make a decision because you got to pick one. And you never knew to look for that 15th variable throughout the whole search process. So all of a sudden now, if you visited, there's a big upside. And if you liked it, there was a big upside. You maybe couldn't visit all of them. So you find yourself saying, I really like the tour. That's why I picked it. And so it's almost a shame because all that valuable information is a little wasted when it was used up on getting on the application list, because you can't use that kind of stuff twice. But it does make all that qualitative information infinitely more important when all the quantitative information is exactly the same across all the candidates.
Wow. I agree with that. And it resonates with me on a personal level, but I certainly see it in the schools that we work with today. So you talked about a time where enrollments were flush. There were more students than there were schools. We're not in that period right now, and most certainly the state of Ohio is not in that period today, right? I mean, the enrollment cliff is certainly hitting and impacting schools in the state that you sit in today, and it has impacted the University of Akron in some very acute ways. Can you talk to us just a little bit about those challenges that exist in the state, and then what you sort of saw at the University of Akron before you assumed a leadership role there?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think the thing about the cliff, just to start there, is it's been given a little bit of a bad rap. For those who don't know what the cliff is, essentially back in 2008 when the last housing crunch happened and the recession followed, basically families stopped having as many children is the real simple way to look at that. It had its own other economic devastations on families. But the reason it's referred to as the cliff now is because the number of babies born in the time since then changed. Why does that matter? Because college has an 18-year echo effect of the birth rate. So if the birth stopped starting in 2008, add up 18 years, and those non-birthed babies are not going to college either. And so as a result, that cliff is really just the echo of that housing crunch from several years ago. The reason I say it gets a bad rap is because people act like it was great the year before. The truth is we've been in a declining headcount reality going all the way back to the baby boomers. So from about 1957, the number of births per 1,000 women has been declining constantly. And so the difference between 2007 and 2008 was notable, but it was still the lowest it had ever been in 2007 at the time. So this clip is really just an extra step down to the basement. It's not like everything was great the day before. So as a result, there's been a lot of institutional, what I would describe as not denial, but the difference isn't maybe that significant compared to the previous years. Well, mathematically, then as far as the nation's concerned, it's like a 15% reduction in headcount. So it is significant. But when you look back at what was going on in enrollment in the 70s, 80s, and 90s compared to where we are today, it is an incredible adjustment in terms of total headcount. That's not really the cliff as much as that evolution.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame it. And I would say, and keep me straight on the facts, because you live this today. It's being acutely felt in places like Ohio.
It is. And, it's interesting because if you were to look on paper, the cliff hasn't supposedly hit yet. Two things have happened. The pandemic, generally speaking, the pandemic has accelerated the emergence of the enrollment numbers that matched what we were projecting 3 years into the cliff. So it has essentially accelerated the cliff, which is weird because we are supposed to have more students. But the pandemic changed some individual decision-making about the value of college. And the climate right now, there's a lot of maybe you should look at other alternatives kind of rhetoric that's going on. So the go to college impetus in the market isn't the same as it was. So we believe that what we were waiting for in 2026, we believe is already more like 2029 already. But the other part that makes Ohio a bit of a hot spot is that there are other parts in the whole northeastern part of the country. There are other parts that have hit the cliff already. And so some of those have had really dramatic declines in their enrollment or in their headcount and ultimately bleeding into their enrollment. So they've come to Ohio looking for more students. So in addition to having fewer students, we have relatively close neighbors who have come to Ohio to take our students back to their campus to fill their own enrollments. The last number I heard was as much as 30% of the graduating class is now moving to go out of state. And so if you take the cliff, its impact on the cliff, its acceleration to 2029, and then 30% of the headcount not even being in the state anymore, suddenly it's not the cliff that's a problem as much as the climate. And so the impact of the cliff has really changed everybody's decision-making. And that decision-making is leveraged by very strategic, usually financial incentives for people to go be enrolled someplace else. And in some cases, they're able to match or beat even the in-state tuition rates. And so a lot of the Ohio students are all over the country backfilling institutional enrollment at other places.
And what you're describing has been felt in a very pronounced way at the University of Akron. And it obviously predated your time there, but can you just talk a little bit about some of the challenges that the institution has faced from an enrollment perspective?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons that I think Akron has been what I would describe as kind of in the throes of this response. One of the other things that's happened in Ohio is there are a couple of very large brands that have made the decision to grow. And so generally speaking, the land grant institutions, the big brand institutions, if you will, they'll never struggle during the cliff. They can admit as many students as they want, and everybody just takes whatever size they want. We've got one, in fact, maybe two, trying to get to 60,000 students as if there's a parade after you get there. But whenever they try to grow, they're not birthing new 18-year-olds out of thin air to ultimately go on to college. So when they expand their class, they're taking them right off of my college campus. So essentially, with all the other challenges we just went through, I also have two campuses on this growth race. And as they grab students, they're pulling them right off of what we would describe as the more regionally focused campus institutions. So for example, if somebody was interested in engineering here or at Cincinnati or here at Ohio State, and they expand their wait list or they expand their population, if I'm their second choice, they're going to go to their first choice. It's not their fault, it was their first choice, but ultimately those decisions for other places to grow have a direct impact on everybody else when there's a finite number of students in the state. So In that regard, I've got 2 schools that are having no impact related to the cliff. But with all the other math I was just describing, it's another hit to the available students that are available to the rest of us. So there are some, we've lost a lot of our enrollment over the last 15 years. Other campuses, we have one down the road from us that's also in that same time frame, down more than a third. We're down a little bit more than that. But the impact in this part of the state has really just been this pull to the bigger brands and other locations. And a lot of that is just done with the publicity and the brand power of those schools in place. For us, we have been primarily an in-state student campus and primarily a Northeast Ohio-based population, as I would describe as our big heartbeat. So as those opportunities start to conflict with other resources, I don't typically draw from other places to backfill them. So essentially, there's this big departure and not a lot of opportunity to compete with it.
So about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, you decided to assume the vice provost of enrollment management position at University.
Yep.
And it's very evident to me that you're a very good-hearted man and you're good at what you do, but what drew you to that job, right? I mean, what you just described, I think a lot of people would be like, I don't know, man, like that might not be where I want to go next.
Yeah, well, there are a couple of things that I think are pretty poignant here. One is, to be perfectly honest, my kids are in Ohio, and so the opportunity to come to Ohio and be where my kids were was a powerful motivator. So in case they ever hear this, I need to make sure they heard that first. But the other thing that has gone on over the course of the last maybe 7 to 10 years of my career is I started to look a little deeper in terms of how the university enrollment and the university's decision-making are connected to enrollment, and sometimes how those become a little incongruent. Suffice it to say, people talk about enrollment like it's actually a proxy for revenue. And so things like, hey, admissions person, you need 200 more students. All of us enrollment managers for our entire career have been told what our target is every year. And since the decline in headcount has become so prominent, it's really hard to get them. And frankly, there's been a lot more unable to get them than there has been able to get them. But what's interesting is it doesn't actually solve the revenue problems at these institutions. And so I found myself saying, but I hit your target. Or even if I hit your target. And ultimately, what I learned can probably be summed up in this sentence. So if you said to me, Steve, I need 200 more students in the fall, I would say, great. Found the 200. It was great because, we have a football team anyway, so I just put them on the football team. And by the way, the football team, if they all get full rides, it was really easy to convince them. So you're welcome. I have 200. If I were to do that, aside from the NCAA rules and how many students you can have, my CFO would have said, oh, no. I didn't mean 200 students that we don't charge any money to. I meant a different 200 students. Oh, well, you didn't tell me which 200 students you needed. You said I needed 200, and so I got 200. And I started to dissect this relationship between, it's really not about the number you gave me. So you must be doing some other kind of math to get there. And ultimately, the reason that was so poignant to me is because they typically take the revenue, divide by the total number of headcount, and then they figure out how much more money they need, and then divide that by the same headcount. And that's how they get to 200. But they never considered if that math works. So for me, what I spent the last 7 years doing is recalculating all that math. And what I learned is you don't need 200 students. You need this much revenue. Why do you care how many students it is? You want to pay your bills, right? So you need that number far more importantly than you need 200. So the context around, can't we just talk about money? Because you think that it's about headcount. And frankly, if I found headcount and they're the wrong revenue, you're going to lose anyway. And one of us is going to be out of a job either.
We're having the wrong conversation, and it's going to lead to the demise of one of us, right?
So when I took this, or both of us.
Yeah,
so
or both.
When I took this job, I asked two questions. I asked a question to the provost and to the president. And I said, look, I've studied the last decade of your common data set. I know what's going on there. Let me just ask you a question. Do you have a revenue problem or headcount problem? And they both said to me, we have a revenue problem. And I said, great, then I'll come because I can fix that. But if you just said it's a headcount problem, then I know you don't even know what your problems are, and I can't fix it because you won't ever let me have the conversation about what's really in play, which is you have to have enough money to pay your bills. So the context for me was I had leadership who said, look, we want as many students as we can have, but we have a revenue problem. And that to me is, those are actions that I can fix within the available student enrollment numbers that I have, because I can't make more seniors, but I can make the affordability work better with the ones I have. And so that to me is the new emergence of enrollment management in, the 2020 moving forward, is the ability to talk about money openly. It's not a 4-letter word. It's just the truth. But institutions all over the country, and just this last week, we saw it impacting the University of Arizona. Last month, it was West Virginia University. We've had our own dealings with it. But every day we seem to be hearing about another campus. But what was interesting about Arizona, Robbins, the president there, the headline read, we didn't know we didn't have enough revenue. We didn't know. And all I going back to is because we haven't taken the time to really do the math. We keep making decisions thinking it's all going to work behind the scenes, and we really need to get out the old 10 key and do the math.
Right. Well, and having spent a little time with you and having read a bit about what is going on at the University of Akron, beyond the numbers and having the right conversation, it seems like there's a new vision for what the university would like to be in the region. Can you talk to us just a little bit about that? Because to me, that's equally as important as having the right numbers conversation.
Yeah, I think so. What I look to most about what's going on, and just so that your listeners know the reference we're talking about, we've had a pretty substantial history in the last 15 years of decline, and I'll point to the last 6 years at least, where every year's decline had a comma in it, and including last year. And then this year, we were +5. So it's easy to say, well, it's not exactly a big increase. But for a community that's used to over 1,000 people down every single year for essentially a decade, to be 5 up even is great news. And so, and all at once, that's the part that really I think made it so significant is there was no gradual return to it was just flat. It just happened. Now, of course, we've been trying to do that for years. I want to make sure that everybody understands that we didn't just start and have it work right away. We were moving quite a bit in this direction prior to the pandemic, which then delayed things. So a lot of our success came back to post-pandemic when our efforts are kind of back into the game. So we feel like we would have hit this a little earlier were it not for a pandemic, for sure. But nonetheless, to just have it stop all of a sudden was such a jolt of energy on the campus and the community. You can just feel it. It's wonderful. And one of the things that I think it has done is it's turned pessimism back into optimism. So as people are talking about the campus, they're not talking about the negatives anymore. They're back to positives and essentially back to the stability in the market that we used to have. And we didn't know how far away from it we were. But it's like people were just waiting for some good news from us. And the moment it happened, we immediately heard tremendous change in morale and opportunity and a big sigh of relief, if you will. But what I think is most significant about it is we've returned back to the mission as the driving force of our strategy. And I credit our president, our provost, who've both been here 2 or 3 years now. And that was their big challenge to the campus is we're a campus of opportunity for Northeast Ohio. We are going to live and die with this Northeast Ohio environment. We have always served them. They are our reality. And we've kind of let ourselves just be known for serving that community and not necessarily leaning into it. You know, you could argue that we maybe haven't been the best neighbor all along. We maybe have bought in a little bit to doing things our own way, and we, have kind of let the community be a neighbor and not necessarily neighborly. But this administration has really leaned back toward the community and said, look, we're your institution. Our success is directly related to your success and vice versa. So we're going to have to lift you up while you lift us up. And together, I think that's been the big difference is Northeast Ohio has said, let's just make this right. And I think the whole community has kind of fallen into that optimism, not just about us, but the fact that they happened at about the same time, I don't think is a coincidence. I think that the area just decided it's time to be better. And I think as a result, everybody's feeling that enthusiasm. And it makes it easier to have the conversations about coming to the University of Akron when it's not the place that's falling, but it's the place that's fine. Not only fine as in talent. I mean fine as in it's stable. It's not a challenge. It's not anything to apologize for. And so as far as we're concerned, we've kind of gone back to our roots and really kind of anchored ourselves back in our community and with the rhetorical influence. And we've got a couple new programs coming up. We've got I don't want to mention them all here, but we've got a big affordability program that we've launched this week. We launched our Make Akron Possible grant for students who have or for families who have AGIs of $50,000 or less, where now the complete value of tuition and fees is just covered. We also launched an institutional grant. We've recently launched our Smart Choice scholarship platform, where students who maybe were considering the university who went elsewhere and decided that wasn't for them and wanted to come back, we're just going to give them their award back that we were going to give them in the first place. And usually transfers forfeit their financial aid package. So we've simply tried to be the place that's affordable and the opportunity is still there. And let's not fight over what we're trying to accomplish. Let's just make this work for everybody. That's what this is all about. It's not bartering, it's becoming. And let's make sure that we can use this unique moment in time to become something extraordinary.
That's awesome. And one of the things that you shared with me that stuck with me the last time that we talked was, and you'll have to help me keep the language as elegant as you made it, is you talked about the University of Akron taking more of a private university mindset into public education.
Yeah, and that might be something that is maybe a little unique to me. I've got this cura personalis in my blood. But in the past, public higher education has really been allowed the opportunity to be a little standoffish over time. I don't want to say arrogant, because I really don't think it's about arrogance. I think it has more to do with the fact that if you're paying more money to go someplace else, that's when you can expect more personal attention, if you will. And the irony is those private schools typically aren't that much more money. There's just an image, and it's usually on the public school environment that image is out there. And so for me, I think what I would say the difference is that the public institutions have just finally, or need to start finally, understanding that we're tuition dependent also. And if we're tuition dependent for our existence, we are private schools. There was a time where there was enough state subsidy, nobody really cared, didn't really matter because you were getting paid the way you needed to from the state. Well, that stopped years ago. And now I think the reason that numbers like 200 more students are the reason that doesn't work is because schools have not been able to figure out exactly how tuition dependent they really are. And as a result, they continue to make bad decisions because they don't really know the financial impact of the decisions that they're ultimately making. So for example, if you want to increase retention, there's a company who's going to sell you a $250,000 a year retention package that'll help you generate retention. If you do an RFP for one of those, you'll get 15 companies trying to be in that space. The whole premise for me is, I would say, have you gone back into your research to find out why these students aren't physically staying? Because we did here. And what we learned was the population that wasn't getting enough financial aid was retaining at 55%, and the population who was getting a lot more aid was retaining at 75%. So we had a financial aid problem, not a retention problem, and financial aid problems I can fix. But if I'd have put another $250,000 into this big retention program, and the issue is they don't have enough aid, it's not going to work. It was never going to work. And so now instead people say things like, oh, those softwares, they don't work. Well, it's not that they don't work. It's that you're solving the wrong problem with it. And as a result, that's where I think the difference between public and private institution is most significant, is those who are tuition dependent know everything about every dollar that comes into their organization, where it came from, who gave it to them, why they gave it to them, and what do we need to do to make sure we get it back? And public schools tend to think that that's a byproduct of the enrollment number. And I would go back and say one of the reasons I think we were losing a full comma or a comma and a half every year is because we thought it was a head count number, and we were making all of our decisions around trying to get the head count. And I believe that was throwing good money after bad, because the financial woes that followed, everybody thought was a head count problem. And the truth was, you had a revenue problem that you threw more money at, which made the revenue hole actually deeper than the head count.
Right. Well, so that's really interesting in the sense that you identified there's a financial aid problem that's impacting retention. You're also doing some things to enhance the student experience as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that too, Steve?
Yeah, and thank you for noticing that. I want to be careful not to take credit despite my talking about it. Ironically, on exactly the same day I started, Dr. Fideria and Nicholson Sweeble started, and the student experience, the advising and the registration experience and the student onboarding all report through Fideria. And I got to work on the data. She got to work on the structure. And so, when we first started, we learned that the group coming in that fall 2022 had a 19% melt. I'm sorry, the 21 class had a 19% melt. And I'm sorry, I had it right the first time. The 22 class had a 19% melt when it came through, and ended up with about a 67% retention rate. And we had historically about a 69%. So a couple of ticks lower, but in higher ed numbers, a 2% drop is enormous. But we didn't know why. So Fideria and her team, studied it. And, what we learned is that population has really been largely educated in the years going into that fall cohort in an online format. They were seniors in high school in the second year of the transition. And so they finished in 2021, finished in 21, 22. So their sophomore, junior, and senior year had varying levels of online education in it. And that population during the pandemic stopped searching for colleges, didn't know. And so what we learned in admissions work is that nobody knew how to recruit or how to get themselves recruited to college. We all had to start over. But in a normal circumstance, the sophomores and juniors would follow the pathway of the seniors ahead of them. So there was enough social pressure to say to them, this is what you're supposed to do. but now nobody saw anybody else. So they all forgot how to do it. So they all just kind of did their best. And we noticed a substantial reduction in our incoming class because of MELT. And then the follow through when everything was back to being in person was just not what we had historically seen. I would say that our traditional practices pre-pandemic didn't work past pandemic. So what Fideria did is she completely re-engineered that onboarding experience so that the population, it was 21 and then 22. So the population that came in at 22 had a very different experience. That group had a MELT of only 12% and a retention rate of 72%. So the structure of how we do it, we are now advising and registering differently, where the way we integrate with holds is different. And that population had most of their high school experience in person again. So all of those things coming together really is a good example of how we created an environment that works better for the students now where the students are compared to the way they used to be. And so we're really excited. The 23 class came in with an 11% MELT, and so we've got really strong optimism for what's going to happen going forward. And we also believe that some of the students from the previous cohorts were able to remain in a little bit longer and more often because of changes we've made to, removing holds. We used to have a hold. You had to go talk to an advisor before you could register. We took the hold off. You can still go talk to your advisor, but forcing people to see the advisor first means you can't register until you can get on their calendar, which could take all summer. So the notion of just simply getting out of people's way and letting them be students in a way that works for them, that meeting them where they are and making the resources available in the consumption pattern that the people need it, that adjustment, a lot of that credit goes to Fideria and others. But what we learned in a 1 year only environment is tremendous number of people want that type of flexibility coming out of the pandemic. And being able to make those adjustments really, really mattered, and it mattered immediately. And we believe that's the reason, the biggest reason that we were able to be flat is, in this case, 5 up, not flat, because we changed a lot of our infrastructure around what we felt our students needed us to be able to provide. And they responded by staying like we thought they would. It was great.
So I'm hearing, and I'm feeling a real turnaround story. It sounds like the energy at your university has changed dramatically from where it was a year ago. You're sharing data points both around enrollment and retention that certainly suggest that there's a lot of good happening, right? That's incredibly exciting in an extraordinarily competitive environment. As you step back, Steve, and you're clearly an introspective guy. What do you hope your, I don't want to call it a legacy, that's probably a strong word, but 5 years from now, what do you hope you can say about your time at the university?
At this university or any university?
Well, let's start with the University of Akron, and then maybe beyond that.
I think the part that I'm most excited about at the University of Akron is the changes that we put in place have changed the trajectory. And so we'll maybe never be 30,000 students again. Most campuses won't be able to be where they were 15 years ago with the cliff and what have you. But the part I'm most excited about is I think we can make the university sustainable at its size. We believe that 16,000, 17,000 students is probably our sweet spot. And if the university can be financially viable in that spot, and basically get everything back to working the way that it's supposed to, we really think the sky's the limit. Because for us, a lot of our challenges on the budget side are just getting out of the debt challenges from those years before. So once those are behind us, if you will, it's like paying off your car. Once you no longer have the car payment, it's like you got a raise. And that's kind of where I think the most exciting time for me will be, is if we can get past the doldrums of some of those financial woes. There's really going to be a shift in, I thought there was a shift to being even, but the opportunity to shift back allows us to invest in our personnel and allows us to invest in our resources. And we're really excited about what we can do when we're back to being on stable ground.
And I'll leave you with the last word here, but I'll just say it's been awesome to share some time with you via the podcast. What I have heard through our almost hour together is someone who was profoundly impacted by their college experience and has carried that through their career. And it sort of, I sense a kind of a North Star for you when it comes to leadership that I don't always hear when I talk to people in higher education.
Well, I appreciate that. If I were to take a last word, enrollment management started as a term. The first time it was published was in 1976. It was a guy by the name of Jack McGuire who first put it in writing. And then about 1983, the word strategic got put in front of the word. And it's a shame because what strategic enrollment management turned into was you don't have to work so hard as an institution, just go get more freshmen. And I think in a lot of ways that's really kind of harmed the long-term trajectory of enrollment in higher ed is we stopped focusing on taking care of people and started focusing on there's more people, let's just go get them.
And I would argue that's not all that strategic, right?
Yeah, well, and it's funny because what started out in enrollment management was, if you were to talk to Jack would say that all the offices were going to hold their arms together and they were going to create an experience that nobody wanted to leave. And then strategic was forget that. Let's just go blow up the number of applications we have. So if you were to say, what's the legacy going forward? I think that I'm trying to anchor a place in FEM, F as in Frank, because I'm trying to create forensic enrollment management, which is financially dependable enrollment management strategies that are basically just built around right-sizing your campus around the revenues you need to have and giving up on this more is better and more is necessary, and really kind of anchoring it around we got to stop charging students for our shortcomings. We got to stop asking people to take out more loans because we have more debts. We can't ask our students to pay for the financial challenges that are available at the university. They didn't create the problem. They shouldn't have to fix it. So to me, that's what I'm most excited about. And what I like most about the way the University of Akron's handling its business right now is they want to have the tough conversations that say, how do we make this so that it's not a problem again? And it requires a lot of hard work, decision-making, and thought, but it's the right thing to do. And it protects our students going forward. It protects their pocketbooks. It protects their families and their families' families and the generations that follow. If we can get ourselves back onto a firm footing, all of higher ed is going to be better off as a result. So that's my long-term legacy is I want to create the FEM, which is the natural progression into financial or forensic enrollment management that is joining the concept of money and the head count into the same discourse.
Love it. Well, Steve, I just want to say thank you for sharing some time with us. I'm going to be very interested to continue to watch the University of Akron story emerge. It's not too far away from Pittsburgh where I live, and really hope a couple years from now that you're able to pound your chest a little bit and bring the F back into enrollment management.
Happy to do it, man. Thanks for your time today. I appreciate it. Good luck.
You got it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, bye now.